Okay, so this is going to be a fun one. 2025 is a massive international year. Why is that? Is it because of the British and Irish Lions tour? Well, no, it's because the World Cup draw for 2027 happens in December. And the rankings that it's based on, into which pot you're in, is depending on where you finish at the end of November. So these summer internationals, these autumn internationals, as we say in the Northern Hemisphere, they mean an awful lot. And I'm going to go through a number of different scenarios where teams are in jeopardy of falling out of certain pots, and that's really going to affect their chances in the World Cup. Now, I haven't mentioned it for a while, but this summer I do have the 45% discount code RugbyAnalyst45 on the manual home testosterone testing kits. You generally get 30% when you kind of sign up as a new customer, so 45% is a bit extra, so worth doing if you're going to do that. Use that code RugbyAnalyst45 on the manual website. Now, briefly, let's talk about the 2027 World Cup, because it is different to the other iterations. It is now expanded from 20 teams to 24 teams. World Rugby want to get more nations involved, spread the word, which I guess is good. You don't want those blowout games, but you've kind of got to start somewhere. And they're moving, because of the extra teams, from 4 pools of 5 to 6 pools of 4. And to make it a bit more of a cup, they've added in an extra knockout round, the last 16, and taken out one of the pool games, which I'm all for, because it's a cup game. You're meant to have that jeopardy of, if you lose, you're out. I think that's absolutely fine. So hopefully it's going to work, and hopefully we don't get too many really one-sided games. Now, 12 teams have already qualified from their finishing positions in the last World Cup. That is France, New Zealand, Italy, Ireland, the champion South Africa, Scotland, Wales, Fiji, Australia, England, Argentina and Japan. Plus we've got 4 nations already qualified from the European Championship. That is Georgia, Spain, Romania and Portugal. But there's other places to be fought for. We've got the Rugby Africa Cup, we've got the Asia Men's Cup, we've got the South America Cup. There's one space there. And there are also some kind of repechage competitions as well. There's the Pacific Nations Cup, and at the end of all of that, you've got a playoff, and you've also got a final qualification tournament to keep that excitement all the way to the end. And then finally, you get to that draw in December. But you are in pots depending on your ranking. Now, if it was done right now, this is what the pots would look like. You've got, South Africa, New Zealand, Ireland in that first pot. They would get drawn first, and each of those teams would go into one of those 6 pools. Now, you can see hanging on there is England, so they would go in as a top seed as it stands, and Scotland as it stands are just in that pot too, so they would get drawn with one of those other big 6 teams. So being in pot 1 is good, because you avoid the better teams. You avoid South Africa, France, New Zealand, whoever. In pot 3, of course, it's really tough, because you're going to be facing guaranteed 2 of the better teams, and pot 4 is obviously the worst to be in. So, you want to be in as high pot as possible, and there are those drop-offs on 6, on 12, on 18. So those are the ones to really look at. Now, very briefly, let's talk about world rankings. I did a whole video on the algorithm, how it works, and actually how it's not too bad, to be honest. It's a point exchange. More points exchanged, the bigger the difference in the 2 teams. If there's a massive difference, if a higher team beats a lower team, they probably get absolutely nothing. And if the lower team loses to the higher team, nothing happens. I think it's kind of over 10 ranking points, something like that. But if you beat a team higher above you, you gain more points, because it's based on the difference. If you beat them by a bigger score, which is over 15, you get a bit more. You get a bit more for being away from home. I'll try and kind of link that algorithm video up in the card up there, or at the end of the video, or both. But that's basically how the ranking system works. So because of that, these summer tours, particularly in a Lions year, can be pretty dangerous for those bigger teams, because often they're resting players, they're with the Lions, they're sending experimental teams, they're developing teams, and they're maybe a bit more vulnerable to being beaten. And just a note, I'm not doing all these calculations manually. I'm using an excellent ranking calculator website, so do use that. All credit to them. It's really exciting, so play around with it. And it's more illustrative. I'm kind of using the lower end of the scores, kind of 14-0, 0-14, generally to model these scores. Obviously, some could be over 16. So that's the way I'm going. Let's talk about England and Argentina. England are touring Argentina, 2 games there, so England would get a little bit more being away from home if they won. So first of all, let's talk about England, Argentina, Scotland. They're all in and around that 6th, 7th place drop-off, and England are playing Argentina, and they're very close in ranking points, just 0.24 apart. England away from home would get a little bit more for beating Argentina, but 2 big losses for England puts them incredibly close to Scotland in 7th. 2 big wins for Scotland, which could well happen, puts them up to 6th, and England would drop out of pot 1. So there's a lot to play for there. Of course, the rankings are only kind of valid at the end of November, but certainly the summer is very important, kind of putting out your stall, and there's lots of big games in the autumn, of course, which could decide it all. And at the end of this video, I'm going to put together every single prediction for 2025 and see what comes out at the end. But in isolation, this is very close. Argentina, they're in danger too. Even 2 small losses drops them down from 5th to 7th outside that pot 1. Then add in that England and Scotland are both playing Argentina in the autumn, and it's going to be a bit of an epic battle. Now let's go down to the second pot of teams where we can see in 12th is Wales in that precarious position, 1 spot away from a guaranteed really hard group, a lot on the line for Wales. And summer, they are playing Japan twice. And Japan, of course, are in 13th. So they are the 2 guys fighting out for that pot 2 spot. So lose the first match, even by a small margin, and Wales would drop them to 14th. But then if it turned around in the second match, they go back to 12th. But they could lose both, of course, and be outside that pot 2. And even if Wales stay in 12th spot in that autumn series, they've got Argentina, Japan again, New Zealand and South Africa. So a big chance of falling out of pot 3. It's a massive year for Wales. Of course, they're trying to find their best team. I mean, they don't even have their coach in place yet, but they're trying to find who their best players are going forward, try and break that run of losses, that historic run of losses, and just create some momentum and good feeling for the players, for the country, for Wales in general. So it's absolutely massive. They need to win in the summer, really to set them up so they can stay in that pot 2. So absolutely huge. But as I say, it's an equally important summer for Japan, as they're in danger of staying in pot 2, even a small loss to Georgia, and it could be all over for their World Cup hopes to try and push through into the knockout. So massive for them, and they've been a bit disappointing recently under Eddie Jones, so they're going to want to bounce back at home. So I'm really looking forward to that series. And I've said before, I'm kind of looking forward to these series, as much, maybe even more than the Lions series. Let me know if that's wrong, but yeah, it's just going to be a great summer basically. But let's finish up with a big one. I'm going to plug in all my predictions for those main fixtures for 2025. I haven't put in every single match, but most of them, to be honest, and it got out of hand enough as it is. And of course, I'm making some big predictions here, but I'm trying to err on the side of caution and saying that a lot of series will be kind of 1-1. Say New Zealand will beat France once, and France will beat New Zealand once, and England Argentina once, and likewise. So I'm trying to be quite conservative. So to save me just reading out a list of results, do pause the video, look at my hypothetical results for 2025, and if you want to argue the results, that's fine, but it's not really the point. I'm kind of putting in some potential results, some realistic results, and seeing what it throws up. And we've got those 3 big losers. The headline is Argentina end up slipping up into pot 2 of the World Cup draw out of pot 1, and Wales in this scenario do indeed finish with a nightmare scenario where they fall into pot 3 and maybe end their hopes in the World Cup. You could say, do they have any at the moment? But they could be a lot better in 2 years, but where they are in the World Cup in their pool is based on the end of this year. That's why it's so important in 2025. And in this scenario, they're going to have some sort of pool of death. And then the third loser would actually be Spain. Good news is they've already qualified, but they would fall from pot 3 to pot 4, making it very hard to qualify for knockouts. So anyway, that is the reason why 2025 is so important to the 2027 World Cup. And I've put out a plausible, I think, scenario of what could happen at the end. But please let me know what your scenario might be. How do you think it's going to play out and why? Love to know all your thoughts. Pop it in the comments down below. Like I say, do like, do subscribe. It really helps the channel. And I'll catch you next time.